Good evening, welcome to the Pearl Report. I'm Diana Lin. China, Japan and South Korea have never fully reconciled their warring past. This has affected their present ties. In the first of a three-part series, Erica Poon scrutinises how these three nations regard their legacies of war and how their expatriates living in each other's countries view their cultural differences and similarities.
Hiroshima, the world's first city to suffer an atomic attack. It built a monument after the war to oppose nuclear weapons.
To accurately and fairly reflect what happened on the 6th of August 1945.
Hiroshima thinks its nuclear attack was very brutal, but I hope to broaden horizons, you'll go to Nanjing to understand how the war damaged other countries.
We Koreans are staunchly anti-Japanese. We call it overcoming Japan.
Trilateral historical and territorial disputes hamper dialogue among Japan, China, and South Korea.
I think being a camouflage-clad politician talking about setting up a national defense force will adversely influence the children.
Shinzo Abe's government shows militarist ambitions.
They would like to do things like revise the Constitution, not only to allow Japan to exercise the right of war and to use force, but also to do patriotic education, which is not allowed today.
Japan's intent to rearm its military is like reviving militarism.
This memorial to victims of the Nanjing massacre is in Jiangdongmen, where tens of thousands of people killed in 1937 by Japanese troops are buried. In various languages, the memorial records 300,000 deaths.
In 1982, Japan's Ministry of Education, Science and Culture revised textbook replacing Invade China with Advanced into China. Many survivors and bereaved family members wrote letters demanding the truth about their tragic history.
Beside the water is a wall with a list of victims whose names have been vetted and verified. The atrocities of the Nanjing massacre are remembered through photographs, sculptures, and artifacts here at the museum. Engraved on this memorial wall are the names of 12,000 of the victims. The message is clear. History can be neither forgotten nor rewritten. Students often visit the memorial to learn about the massacre. Near the exit is a pond added in the 2005 expansion to advocate peace. Visiting Japanese groups note down their expectations on how Japan should face its war history. This is Okunoshima in Hiroshima Prefecture. It draws about 120,000 tourists a year, not only for its scenery, but also its ubiquitous rabbits, several hundred of them. Their ancestors are actually a testimony to Japan's use of biological weapons in the Second World War.
Once they invented a new kind of poisonous gas, they have to test it to confirm if it could kill people before sending the gas to the battlefield. So the rabbits were used in experiments.
Masayuki Yamauchi was a teacher. He later shifted his focus to investigating this poisonous gas island. He says Okunoshima produced 6,000 tons of toxic gas during the war, with the potency to kill several 100 million people. Half the gas was sent abroad, including to China, for use in warfare.
During the war, Okunoshima didn't exist on the map.
At the time, Okunoshima's production of biological weapons was classified information. Many workers there suffered health problems, but few cared about the harm done to the Chinese.
They only knew they produced poisonous gas, but they didn't know how it would be used. Those who survived the war might learn of it afterwards, but they weren't too concerned.
Hiroshima, Japan. During the war, Hiroshima Prefecture produced poisonous gas, and Hiroshima City became the world's first city to suffer an atomic bombing. The pond in Peace Memorial Park signifies peace. Nearby is the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, built in 1955, a decade after the war. This model portrays the scene 1 second after the atomic bomb exploded 600 meters above Hiroshima.
To accurately and fairly reflect what happened on the 6th of August 1945. Also to say never repeat such a tragedy, and to hope for a ban on nuclear weapons. These are the purposes of building it.
Besides the general public, many schools arrange for their students to visit here. It depicts the city before and after the atomic bombing. It's rife with information on the power and destructive force of nuclear weapons, even displaying donated clothing, shoes, and socks. Chinese scholars visiting in 1992 told the curator the memorial's information is insufficient.
It only depicts the moment the atomic bomb exploded, but not why the bomb was dropped. It's hard for Chinese people to understand. He said you're not the first one to question this. Many Chinese and Koreans who saw this feel discontented.
Kenji Shiga, who became curator just recently, says in the 1994 expansion, the memorial added background on Hiroshima as a military headquarters and a brief history of Japan's invasion of China.
Before the first Sino-Japanese War, the place was already a military port.
And one paragraph depicts the Nanjing massacre.
Very controversial. This says Nanjing people were slaughtered. It states here China claims 300,000 victims. Actually, the information sparked controversy when it was unveiled 20 years ago. Some said it was enough just to show the atomic bombing.
Hiroshima's view on peace has all along been criticized as being too narrow.
If the Japanese only cared about the ravages of war, it's hard for them to talk to Chinese and Korean people. Because from our point of view, you are the invader. You started the war.
For example, invading China, the Nanjing massacre. These should be mentioned. More importantly, enslaving Koreans and many other things must be stated. Plus the many occurrences inside Japan, but covering all these things seems impossible.
Kenji Shiga thinks attaining peace requires synesthesia, being mutually empathetic. He says Osaka Mayor Toru Hashimoto's comment that comfort women were necessary shows he lacks synesthesia.
He doesn't understand comfort women's lives and lacks synesthesia about their feelings. It's hard for me to say any more.
You get these politicians who will say these things because they're hoping to please and flatter conservative elements in Japan. And I don't think those politicians represent the general feeling of the Japanese people.
Most important is we don't think it's only a problem with the Osaka mayor. It shows how Japanese society has viewed comfort women all along. The vital point is Japanese authorities let him talk nonsense.
Every Wednesday for the past 20 years, many groups protest the issue of comfort women outside the Japanese embassy in South Korea. Women who were forced to become comfort women for Japanese troops also participate.
We are here to support all the victims of the Korean history that are being invaded by a few Japanese politicians, and we are here to upright that history.
일본군 위안부 피해자에게 공식 사죄하고 국제법에 따라 배상하라!
The problem of comfort women remains a thorn on the side of Korea-Japan ties, and in recent months, Premier Shinzo Abe's liberal democratic government is poised to revise the constitution to turn Japan's self-defense troops into a national defense force. The media reports it also intends to use the Rising Sun military flag as the national flag. And on the atomic bombing anniversary this year, the biggest warship in the self-defense fleet was launched. It's named Izumo after a warship used in Japan's invasion of China. Observers say that's a sure sign of a revival of militarism.
Japan's intent to rehaul its military is like reviving militarism. So it is ignoring both the issue of comfort women and its colonial role.
The Korean peninsula was partitioned in a war in the last century after 35 years of Japanese colonial rule. The Independence Hall in Cheonan, South Korea, records what Koreans view as the tragedy of Japan's invasion and colonization. In 1910, Japan forced Korea to sign a Japan-Korea treaty, subjugating Korea to a coercive rule that Koreans vehemently resisted. Their largest mass resistance campaign was the 1919 March 1st movement, where Koreans proclaimed their independence.
9 years after Japan wrested sovereignty, With one heart, Koreans strived for their nation's independence.
The Independence Hall of Korea was built in 1987 to protest Japan's textbook revisions. For instance, the plunder of Korean soil became the annex of land. The people were so enraged, they raised funds to build the commemorative museum.
The Japanese should reflect on it the most. I hope the Japanese understand it's not shameful to teach your progeny that predecessors have done wrong. Portray history falsely to your progeny is even more shameful.
The museum uses forceful occupation to explain Japan's rule. Curator Kim Nung-jin thinks most people still resent the historical subjugation of their nation.
Koreans are staunchly anti-Japanese. We call it overcoming Japan. The spirit of overcoming Japan. We were invaded by Japan, so we can't lag behind Japan in any aspect.
Ties between South Korea and Japan have also been adversely affected by their territorial dispute over the Dokdo Islands, while Japan's privatization of the Diaoyu Islands last year sparked a series of anti-Japanese protests in mainland China. Such tensions have caused the China-Japan-Korea summit, originally scheduled for May, to be delayed. This is the scene from the Roppongi Hills Mori Tower in Tokyo. Many Chinese and Korean students study in the Japanese capital. Eun-kyung, a Korean, and Li Wei, a Chinese, are both studying in Japan.
When mainland China sees many anti-Japanese protests and mounting anti-Japanese sentiments, my parents are very worried. They often call me and ask if there's anything wrong in Japan.
China and South Korea both have tense relations with Japan, resulting in sporadic anti-Japanese protests in mainland China and anti-Korean demonstrations in Japan.
They called after watching the news to tell me it's dangerous and not to go out so often.
The two youths got along so well after meeting in Japan, they rented a house together. On this day, the friends shop for a meal in Li Wei's home. Besides befriending Li Wei in Japan, Eun-kyung also met a boyfriend whom she has married. He is Eun-kyung's new husband, Takahiro Buchi. Eun-kyung was somewhat perturbed about telling her parents about the impending marriage because her future spouse is Japanese.
After dating a while, I introduced him to my family. It coincided with a Dokdo incident. My family had a bad impression of Japan, saying they disliked Japanese people.
On the other hand, Takahiro's parents didn't mind their son taking a South Korean wife.
They didn't object. On the contrary, due to Japan-Korea tensions, my parents were concerned about what her parents and relatives would think.
Eun-kyung and Takahiro tied the knot in June. They held wedding banquets in both Japan and South Korea. Eun-kyung notes some relatives had gossiped about her union with a Japanese.
Japanese people are bad. They have many problems between countries. Japanese people are disappointing. Relatives would tell me this directly. I thought, why? It's my relationship. It's him I love. Why should I let you say these things? It's no longer the colonial era.
Media reports say Japan Premier Shinzo Abe would not visit the Yasukuni Shrine, where some Class A war criminals are commemorated. Regarding the Yasukuni Shrine issue, Takahiro opposed the visit, like Eun-kyung and Lee Wei.
The government worship them as heroes. Honestly, it is better not to do so. They pretend not to hear the worst defeats in war. Don't pretend not to hear them.
The Chinese, Japanese, and Korean people were educated in different ways about the history shared by their three nations. A South Korean textbook covered Japan's coercive rule in 4 chapters. Yet a Japanese textbook mentions little about forcibly colonizing Korea, sparking anti-Japanese protests. And for the Nanjing massacre, one Japanese textbook called it the Nanjing Incident, while another said victim numbers varied and the situation was unclear. This reference book was jointly compiled by Chinese, Japanese, and Korean scholars in all 3 languages to counter textbooks from Japanese publisher Fusosha, glossing over Japan's invasion of China and Korea. The book's factual depiction has been criticized in Japan as an exaggeration, but this Japanese co-author stood his ground.
I believe in writing scrupulously. Not only this book, every textbook must state the facts. To confirm the facts, or make them much clearer, it should be like this.
A South Korean scholar thinks Japanese people are still largely unaware their country is an aggressor in war.
Whether
the Japanese are the aggrieved or the aggressor is the most difficult question. Nowadays in Japan, some people think invasion is the government's and the emperor's responsibility. The people were just obeying orders.
Lately, Premier Shinzo Abe has provoked anger among Chinese and Koreans. In April, he wore camouflage gear to board a tank. In July, he issued a defense white paper accusing China of expansionism. He's also poised to amend the constitution to set up a national defense force. Analysts suspect tacit backing from the United States.
With US backing, there is no need to worry or heed China and South Korea's criticisms. So now I think US attitude towards him is a very important factor.
In the upper house polls in mid-July, Shinzo Abe's ruling Liberal Democratic Party and coalition partner New Komeito secured more than half the seats. Where will they lead Japan, and will they shatter East Asia's 60 years of peace?
People nowadays have no experience of war, never took part in war. To let the Japanese understand the harm of warfare is getting more difficult.
Japan surpassed the distortion of history. The government is leading the glossing over of history. This is very serious.
Nowadays, youths talk easily of war, especially with present tensions. They think Japan must strengthen their military might. This kind of thinking is intensifying, and I feel very afraid.
Well, thank you for watching our show. It will be re-aired on Tuesday and Saturday, as well as on tvb.com. Next week, Korean culture sweeps the world. Until then, from the Pearl Report team, good night, good luck, and good health.